Most people only know of World War I as the war that came before World War II. It was far more than that. It was 2 million inadequately trained American soldiers, mostly farm boys, crowded together in camps and trains and transport ships where thousands died of Spanish influenza. Those that reached Europe faced all the horrors of industrialized warfare and battle-hardened German armies that killed like efficient machines. But these American farm boys astounded the Germans with their fearlessness and their tenacity. In 1918, American troops played key roles in stopping the last big German offensives of the war, first at Chateau Thierry in late May, then at Belleau Wood in June, then at the Second Battle of the Marne in July. The Americans stopped the Kaiser's stormtroopers because they simply would not give ground. As a Marine commander famously responded when he was told to retreat at Belleau Wood, "Retreat hell, we just got here." In September, the Americans went on the offensive, first at Saint Mihiel, then beginning on September 26th in the enormous Meuse-Argonne offensive, which finally ended the war on November 11th. Lampasas County boys fought with great valor. 9 were killed. 3 of those were decorated for their valor. More should have been. Like many Lampasas County boys, Private Miles D. Little served in the Army's 90th Division. He was in the medical detachment of the 343rd Machine Gun Battalion. Private Little served during virtually all of the final Meuse-Argonne offensive, which he described in letters to his parents. The first letter was written 3 days after the offensive began.
Dear Mama and Papa, our battalion was in the battle, but came out all okay. I was about 2 weeks without a bath, but we all had good baths today. During the drive, we were located for a while in the trenches, captured from the Germans. It was a wonderful sight. They were certainly fixed well, and the German army is well equipped. We captured a lot of their personal equipment. They had our exact range, and we had a time dodging shell shrapnel. They would not give us a minute's rest, and believe me, I was glad when we got out of there. The hills were covered with the dead. Our battalion alone buried 50 men. I saw Germans and Americans lying dead side by side. It was an awful sight at first, but we soon got used to it. I hope the war will soon be over. I don't want to get into another battle like this, but I don't think it will be over soon. I've been in the Army over a year, and I hope I will not be in it another year. I am feeling fine, and don't believe anything but a German bullet will put me out of action. I've not seen Sam Dickens since the fight, but think he pulled through all right. I saw Lawrence Price during the fight on German territory. He had been over the top and had a German officer's pistol. He went through it all without a scratch. He said he saw boys shot by his side or in front of him. He said he guessed the Lord was with him. I have not seen Jack White nor heard a word from him, though I think he is all right. Miles.
Miles wrote another letter home less than 2 weeks before the Meuse-Argonne offensive ended the war.
France, October 29th, 1918. My dearest Mama and Papa, this is Tuesday night, about 6:30 o'clock, and everything is well. I'm still feeling fine, haven't even had a bad cold. I am heavier and feel better than I ever did in my life. We are located in a sector where the hardest fighting of the war is in progress. I look for this fight to settle the war, and believe if I manage to pull through it, I will be able to return home to you safe and sound. I'm certainly glad this war is over here instead of at home. You people in the States have no idea of the immensity and horror of this great struggle. It is only by chance that anyone lives through it. I am, at this very moment, in a little hole about 3 feet deep and 2 feet wide, with some planks over me to slow up the shrapnel so that maybe it won't kill me. Every time a shell hits anywhere close, the hole seems to bounce up and down. The roar of the guns and shells is something awful. No one has any idea what it is until they go through it. My candle is just about out. We'll have to close. Hoping that the war will be over by the time you get this, and that I will still be alive and sound, and on my way back home. Your son, Miles. found another piece of candle, so we'll write a little more. There is a constant roar of artillery. One of the greatest artillery engagements of the war will soon be on, the outcome of which will be the end, I think, of this war. We Americans are on the strongest defended part of the whole line, and we are determined to break through if it costs the life of every one of us. We want to hit hard now. We are tired of it and want it over and get home. I never wanted to get to a place as bad in my life as I do the United States. There is no place like the USA. Goodbye. Hope I survive this battle. Your loving son, Miles D. Little.
Marville, France, November 23rd, 1918. Mr. Miles D. Little. Dear Mr. Little, I take it as a privilege to write to the father of Miles. It was a privilege that I had to meet you 2 or 3 times in Camp Travis. The chances are you do not remember me. Anyhow, it does not matter. I remember you very well. I counted Miles as one of my best friends and was with him the entire day before and when he was killed. Miles had been up to the front and over the top and had come back to the kitchen for something to eat, and he and I were on our way back. The kitchens were being moved up, so we rode in the trucks carrying them because we no longer knew the location of our company. The trucks got into a bad traffic jam, so Miles and I went ahead afoot. We walked about 8 miles and came to the top of the hills overlooking the beautiful valley of the Meuse. We spent the afternoon roaming around on the hill and watching the Germans shelling in the valley below us. The trucks did not come up until about dark. We had noticed several times during the afternoon that the Germans dropped a few shells along the road we were to travel. And while we were talking to some engineers working on the road, one told us that a man had been wounded down the road where we had seen the shelling. Nothing would do but that Miles should go down and see if he could help. When we got there, the man was dead. It was while we were returning that a shell fell right beside us and killed Miles. His death was instantaneous and without pain. I placed him where no more shells could hit him and covered him up in his blanket. The following day, such of his friends as could be spared from the battalion went and buried him. Had all of his friends gone, the whole battalion would have gone, for he was everyone's friend. I'm not saying this because he was your son, but because it is the truth. He was the best-liked man in the entire battalion. He is buried in the most beautiful spot in France that I have permitted to see. You can locate the spot almost exactly on the map. He is right close to a village called Montigny, and is near the town of Salmourier on the River Meuse. There is nothing that I can say that will in any way lessen your grief. But if this can be any consolation, I am happy to be able to say in all truth that wherever duty called, Miles was there smiling. You never heard him grumble at any hardships he had to endure. Duty never had to call twice, but it only had to whisper, and Miles was off, always smiling. Your friend, Clyde Tandy, Company A, 343rd Machine Gun Battalion, AEF, France, APO 770.
Corporal Benton Northington served in the Company D 360th Infantry Battalion. He saw service in many of the important engagements of the war. Like Miles Little, he served during almost all of the final Meuse-Argonne offensive. He was wounded by machine gun fire on November 2nd while taking a heavily fortified German position. He was taken to a mobile hospital where he died on November 9th, 2 days before the war ended. The Army nurse that cared for him wrote several letters to his parents describing their son's death.
Toul, France, January 28, 1919. My dear Mr. and Mrs. Northington, your letter of December 11th just received, and I will try to tell you all I can about our brave Corporal Northington. He came to us November 3rd, wounded in the abdomen and left arm. He was operated on at once, came back to his bed and was in good condition. Abdomen not bad at all. Arm was bad and we tried to save it, but gas infection set in, which meant we had to amputate at the shoulder to give him one chance for his sweet young life. When I wrote you after the operation November 3rd, he was fine, and I had so hoped he would get well. But about the 7th, he began to show signs of gas infection. I will tell you what is meant by gas infection. As you know, the Germans put gas shells on our boys at the front, and when the gas got into a wound, it was almost always fatal. Our hospital was a mobile hospital, all tents. We moved from one front to another. Just as soon as our boys are fit to send to a base hospital, we loaded them into an ambulance and sent them on, so we could keep taking bad cases in from the field. We kept your young boy longer because he was not fit to send on, and we thought to save him. We took good care of all our dear boys. They had nice beds and pillows and all the comfort we could give them. Your boy was well taken care of. The day before he died, he talked to me. He always called me Mother. I suppose because I have seen 40 years, my boys always called me Mother over here, and I don't object at all because there was so many young boys among them. I will tell you that his death was a sweet, peaceful end, and he did not suffer. The morning he died, I was feeding him some lemon juice. He put his good arm around my neck and asked me if I thought he could get well. I told him I hoped so. He then told me to write his mother if anything happened and tell her about it. I told him I would. I also told him I would tell your mother that you have been a good boy. He said, "Thank you. I have been a good boy." He was conscious almost to the last. I stayed with him, the chaplain and I, until the end came. He held my hand and seemed to be resigned. He was buried with military honors as near as possible. There was present myself, the chaplain, and a little Italian orderly from New York that was devoted to your little boy until the end. When we got to the plot, which was alongside our hospital, an American train came along, and we had a large funeral, and our brave boy was laid to rest under a large American flag and taps blown. I'm sending you a picture of the plot, which I hope will not make you feel bad, but give you an idea of where your boy is, and you will see he is not alone. I have letters from 5 other poor mothers about their boys. This picture is not good. It rains most of the time, but I always try to get a picture of every plot where our brave boys lie who've given their lives. I will give you the name of the place where he is buried, grave number 68, East Essen Mews. This is close to the Verdun front. Well, my dear people, I will close for now with much sympathy for you and the loss of your son and hero. I will close with best wishes and hope to hear from you again. I am on my way to the States. Julia Douglas, Eckerd Apartment 3, 617 South 31st Street, Omaha, Nebraska.
Benton's family received many letters of sympathy. 3 in particular, written to his mother and older sister Annie, illustrate the contrasting way in which each person affected by the war struggled to justify its immense slaughter.
Lockhart, Texas, December 17th, 1918. My dear, dear little sister, today a letter came from Marie telling of the great sorrow that has come to you and all the loved ones in your home. I know that this letter won't make your sorrow one bit lighter, but I remember 4.5 years ago when my own brother was taken. My heart almost broke with grief, and I remember that sweet letter of love and sympathy you wrote me. I shall never forget those letters I received, and somehow it did help me. And I feel that my best friends felt my sorrow and wept with me, even though it was from a distance. I didn't lose my brother Seth, but many times I wondered if I would have to give him up for our country like many, many others did. I felt then that that old flag of red, white, and blue would seem dearer to me than ever, for a part of my own would go into its keeping. I feel like even though it's somebody else's brother that was called upon to die for our flag, that the flag is mine. Victory is mine, purchased for me at the cost of somebody's son and somebody's brother. So you see, aside from loving you dearly, how I would like to help you and share in your sorrow. I must close now, because there is nothing else I can say, only that this letter is from my heart, the very bottom of it. I shall ask our Father to give you and all your family his presence now in your need. Your friend, Zula.
Marble Falls, Texas, December 22, 1918. Dear Miss Annie, this has been a gloomy Sunday. I have been thinking of you all so much today, and so much of another of our friends' family here. A fine young boy, Paul's classmate, was in Massachusetts training at some sort of school for radio transmission, and just dropped dead. His parents are nearly crazy. They can't be reconciled to his death. Paul is to be one of the pallbearers. He is so sad. First Benton, and then Thomas, 2 of his best friends. Everyone is having so much sorrow now. How are your mother and father? Are they bearing up under this awful sadness? I hope and pray God will bless them, and that they can see how much better off their dear boy is than we who are left behind. I feel so sorry for you all. I wish I could say something that would be the right thing, but I can't. I do think it is too bad that he had to die where and as he did. Still, I'm certain he had all done for him that could be done. I'm sure that was God's way. If God was pleased with this war, that is, that we take part in it. We could only fight for life and fight for right. We know how brave and how patriotic Benton was. I feel we had to do as we have done. So I'm sure that was God's will. If we could all learn not to wish for our loved ones back, it ought to be a great comfort to have them with God, out of this world of troubles and cares. I can't help wishing for my dear boys back. But I am selfish and sinful, I know. But oh, I can't help wishing I had them back. My life is so lonely and the time so long. I must close now. May the good Lord bless you all. Your friend, Mrs. Ernest H. Odiorn.
The third letter was written to Benton's mother by the mother of Milas Little. Milas was killed in the war 5 days before Benton died.
Dear Mrs. Northington, your dear letter came a few days ago, and I just can't tell you how my heart goes out to you in this sad hour. We surely know what this war has cost you. My heart aches for you and your family. To say we are grieved does not express it. We are mortally wounded. Killed expresses it better. I just feel like I could give my life for a great cause, but I couldn't give my boy for any cause, if I had been consulted. The rulers of our country forced thousands of our dear boys to go to a foreign land to suffer and die, away from home and loved ones. To me, it was horrible. I can't be reconciled to it. All I can see is the terrible death and the little mound of dirt which covers my precious boy's body. The world may be made a better place because of this sacrifice for 20 million lives, but it isn't God's way. Our thoughts are with you and our prayers for you in this sad hour. We too mourn and sympathize with you. We know what you are suffering. May God give us all comfort, is my prayer. Your friend who mourns and sympathizes with you, Mrs. Little.
Just before Christmas, the Lampasas Daily Leader reprinted a remembrance, originally written for a Kansas paper, of Lampasas and of 4 of its boys who died in the Great War.
3 little boys used to live side by side in one of the central towns of Texas. They were Cecil and Ralph and Justin. Across the street lived Will. It was on the main street of the town, and the people, both on foot and driving, passed often. Their great amusement was driving, for they were a health-loving people in a health-giving place. Overhead, the china trees bore their green grape-like berries in the summer, or flung them brown and withering down to earth in the winter. Here and there, the great live oaks shed their perpetual shade over the town. The thorny mesquite trees added to the verdure of the landscape, and to many of their forms clung with tenacious grasp the graceful mistletoe with its pearl berries, or the graceful gray moss. The town lay in a cup of hills, and across its lower border was flung the greenish waters of Sulphur Creek, bordered with willows and bearing upon its surface groups of reeds or masses of succulent cress. Fish there were in plenty, and fishermen spent many lazy, happy hours angling for them, while sitting on the edge of the rugged stone wall that formed the noisy dam. Over to the south, the watermill chugged all day long, pumping the sulfur water from the spring that bubbled up so powerfully right in the bed of the creek. Close at hand was the magnificent park where people from all over the Lone Star State loved to camp among the beautiful trees and plunge in the swimming pool of a never-ending flow of water. The townspeople, too, made daily pilgrimage to the old Hancock Park, and many were the pool parties enjoyed there with a lunch of sandwiches, pickles, and hot tamales. In such happy environment lived Cecil, Ralph, and Justin, and Will across the street. Cecil was a musician, not a trained one, but his talent led him into sweet improvisation as he toyed with fragments of the masters or bits of more popular ragtime. Sometimes he would call on the neighbors garbed in his mother's dresses, and occasionally he wandered off to the country for a day's pilgrimage, accompanied by old Jack, a dog whose repertoire of tricks was full. Justin was the idol of an adoring stepmother, gentle and careful of dress, a ladies' man even in his boyhood. Will was the black-eyed baby of the family, shy to all but his playmates, but Will was all there just the same. He was the youngest of this quartet of boys, and one can remember him best shinning up over the roof of the barn or getting out his fishing tackle. The boys used to gather in Ralph's yard to walk the wire he had stretched between the two trees near the alley, or to watch his Mexican hog or peccary eat in his retreat in the backyard. Sometimes they would pile on his burro one at a time and ride off in slow advance down the shady street. But Ralph loved best to prance off on his Prince, the bay saddle horse, with a rope coiled, cowboy fashion over the horn of his saddle. He was essentially of the outdoors type, loving the open places, informed of nature. Many a trail did he take with Will, and he often accompanied his father on deer hunting or fishing trips on the banks of the wild and rocky Colorado. At that very time, a mad, fiendish brain over in Europe was planning a future for these innocent, unsuspecting boys. He was equipping an army, fortifying his own country, and even the neighboring territory where he expected to gain a foothold. All over the world he planted his flag and made devilish arrangements to gain the ascendancy over the nations. He forgot the real God and worshiped the god of lust and power and cold-blooded greed. Today, where are these little boys? This man got them, every one. Cecil was killed in action while casualty lists were yet short. Justin died at sea just before his ship reached England. The other two were victims of exposure and disease in training camps, and they were laid to rest at home where father and mother can stand guard over their narrow beds. Yes, the Kaiser got them all. Their forms were sacrificed to his greed, but not their spirits, not the real boys, no. Even he who deemed himself so all-powerful could not enter that domain. For there is one greater who is taking care of the soldier lads, and who gave up all their happy plans and beautiful hopes, that the world may be free. Their anguish and their pain have passed, and peace has come to them at last. But in the stern looks linger still the iron purpose and the will. Dear Christ, who reigns above the flood of human tears and human blood, a weary road these men have trod. Oh, house them in the home of God.
All this sickness, sorrow, and death around us. Truly, we have never seen so much.
I had a little bird whose name was Inza. I opened up the window and in flew Inza. I had a little bird whose name was Inza. I opened up the window and in flew.
1918 was a bad year in Lampasas County from the beginning. On January 10th, the worst blizzard in memory killed livestock across the county. Later that month, the measles epidemic sickened hundreds. That spring and summer, for the third year in a row, there was no rain. Ranchers had to sell livestock or buy expensive hay to keep it alive. Lifelong residents like Benton Northington, stationed at Camp Travis since September 1917, talked of leaving the county.
Camp Travis, May 26, 1918. Dear Mother, I received your letter this morning and was glad to hear from you all. I am sorry it is so dry. I was in hopes you all had some rain by now. I guess things do look pretty blue, but maybe it will set into raining next month, and you all can make a pretty good cotton crop. And Virgil sold some of his cows for a pretty good price, but if it would rain, they would be a better price than that. If I ever get out here, I'm going to land in a good country somewhere. Your son, Benton.
Benton had hoped that it would rain, but the next month it didn't, or during the rest of the summer. The drought continued into September, but by then the people of Lampasas County were more preoccupied with the Great War and the hundreds of young men they had proudly sent off to fight in it. The county had already lost 4 boys to the measles that had spread through the overcrowded training camps the winter before. The measles had killed at least 3,000 soldiers nationwide. The measles epidemic was just a warning. Far worse was coming. The Spanish flu had arrived in Lampasas by October 1st, 1918. It may have come with a group of traveling musicians who were to perform that evening at the Opera House. The Lampasas Daily Leader announced that performance was canceled because of sickness among the singers. Whoever brought it, the flu virus was in Lampasas County, and it spread like a brush fire. But there was little alarm at first. It was just the flu.
Lampasas Daily Leader, Thursday, October 3rd. News from Adamsville. Miss Naomi Hallmark is home from school in Lampasas on account of getting herself a good case of the grip.
Then the deaths began. First among the soldiers the county had sent off to war.
Lampasas Daily Leader, Saturday, October 15th, 1918. Dr. and Mrs. J.D. Dorband received a message Saturday afternoon informing them of the death of their son, Justin Dorband, who died September 30th in a hospital in Liverpool. He was in the aviation section of the Marines. Dr. and Mrs. Dorband have the sincerest sympathy of the Lampasas people in the death of their son.
These first death notices provided sparse information. Influenza was never mentioned. Justin's parents later learned that he had caught the flu on his transport ship, been taken off sick when the ship docked in Liverpool, and died there. Those who died along the way were buried at sea. 4 days later, news arrived of a death much closer to home.
Lampasas Daily Leader, Wednesday, October 9th, 1918. The many friends of the family were made sad here Wednesday when they learned of the death of Paul O'Keefe at Camp Travis, San Antonio. Paul was 22 years of age and has made his home in Lampasas practically all his life. He left Lampasas on September 5th for Camp Travis, where he went into training. The same honor is due him as though he was in frontline trenches, for he was doing his bit as best he could and making preparations for further service.
2 days later, William T. Rush, Jr. of Lampasas died at Camp Mabry in Austin. The following Monday, the publisher of the Lampasas Daily, J.H. Abney, received word that his youngest son, Will, had died of pneumonia at Camp Upton, New York. A sign in the window of the newspaper office said simply, "No paper today, 10/14/18. My boy Will died." The next day, word came of the death at Camp Travis of Roy Jones from Pecan Grove. His obituary reflected bewilderment that this new disease was killing young, healthy men. Roy was a fine physique and appeared to be in the best possible health, but he could not combat the pneumonia disease. The death of 5 of its boys in less than 2 weeks shook Lampasas County, and prompted an anonymous tribute published in the October 16th paper.
Lampasas Daily Leader, Wednesday, October 16th, 1918. In less than one fortnight, 5 Lampasas boys, Justin Dorbant, Paul O'Keefe, W.T. Rush, Will Abney, and Roy Jones, have paid the supreme sacrifice, have given their all while in the line of duty, have passed to that great over there, and have joined that higher army.
Later, in that same paper, a 6th obituary appeared.
Lampasas Daily Leader, Wednesday, October 16th, 1918. Again, our hearts are made sad when we learned Wednesday of the death of John W. McCann, a Lampasas County soldier boy at Camp Travis. Mr. McCann was a son of Mr. and Mrs. J.W. McCann, who lived near Lomita and left here September 5th for Camp Travis. He had been ill with influenza and developed pneumonia, which caused his death Tuesday night. The bereaved parents and relatives have the sincere sympathy of the people here in their sorrow.
Private McCann's obituary was the first of the 6 to put a name on the killer, influenza. By November 1st, the flu had killed 5 more Lampasas County boys. In 1 month, Lampasas County lost 11 of its soldiers, more than were killed in the war itself. The flu took a much higher toll on the civilian population of the county. Quick action by Lampasas officials kept that toll from climbing even higher. Large cities like New York, Philadelphia, and San Antonio did not immediately close schools and cancel public events when the flu arrived. All were hit particularly hard. More than half the population of San Antonio got the flu. 11,000 people died in Philadelphia. Lampasas did not make the same mistake.
Lampasas Daily Leader, Thursday, October 10th, 1918. Public schools closed. On account of the epidemic of Spanish influenza in our city, Dr. D.W. Black, City Health Officer, has closed the public schools of our city. When conditions warrant, the schools will reopen and notice will be given by Dr. Black through the Leader. Lampasas Daily Leader, Friday, October 11th, 1918. Because of the prevalence of Spanish influenza in many localities, and in order to safeguard the health of the city, we think it advisable to discourage all public gatherings until there is a decided improvement in the health of our citizenship. It is therefore requested that all persons refrain from going to public places and that parents keep their children at home. It is further requested that all citizens immediately clean their premises and put them in good sanitary condition. D.W. Black, City Health Officer. L.R. Sparks, Mayor.
But the flu already had a foothold. The next day's paper reported that the town barber, Eugene Townsend, had died of the flu. How many haircuts had he given before he knew he was sick? How long before his customers developed the first symptoms? A sudden fever spike, a violent nosebleed, a sudden blinding headache. The rest of that day's paper was filled with the flu. The Methodist minister canceled services and urged everyone to remain in their homes and to pray for one another. The Baptists, the Presbyterians, and Church of Christ followed suit. The local draft board announced that all new inductions had been canceled because of the influenza epidemic that is in the training camps. The board asked for all nurses willing to go to the camps to report immediately. It did not explain that most of the nurses already in the camps were sick or dead. Everyone knew. The nurses went anyway. They went because the people of Lampasas County took care of their own, knowing full well the enormous risk. Some made the supreme sacrifice in doing so.
Lampasas Daily Leader, Saturday, October 26, 1918. Worth Matthews died early Saturday morning at the home of Jeff Smithwick, where he had been ill with influenza and pneumonia for several days. He had made his home near Naruna, and 2 weeks ago he and his wife came here on account of sickness in the house of Mrs. Matthews' parents, Mr. and Mrs. Jeff Smithwick. Mrs. Matthews was taken ill and died last Saturday, and her husband survived her only 1 week. The parents are survived by a small child, besides a large number of relatives who have the sincere sympathy of a large number of friends in this sorrow.
Lampasas Daily Leader, Friday, January 10, 1919. A great sorrow was thrown over this community Friday when we learned of the death of Oliver Eddy, who died at the home of his parents at Stanley Chapel, whom he and his wife had come to help in their sickness. His wife and a 2-year-old son and 2 brothers were in bed at the time of his death with the flu.
Because the flu was particularly deadly for young adults, it frequently took both parents of young children, as it had with Worth and Bessie Matthews. There were others.
Lampasas Daily Leader, Monday, December 30, 1918. News from Center. We laid Mrs. Lawrence Medders away in this cemetery Sunday evening by the side of her husband, who was buried the Thursday before, both dying with influenza. She left a beautiful little 3-year-old girl crying for her mother. Mrs. Yazell, an aunt at Lampasas, has her. Brother Tolliver preached the funeral service.
2 weeks later, the flu killed Miss Yazell. The Little Meadows girl was not mentioned in Mrs. Yazell's obituary, and we do not know what became of her. 3 out of 4 pregnant women who contracted the flu did not survive. Lily Key contracted the flu late in her pregnancy. Her child was born prematurely on December 20th. He was buried the next day. Lily followed on the 23rd. She was buried on Christmas Eve. Lily was 25 years old. For every death from the flu in Lampasas County, there were at least 20 non-fatal cases. Many were mild. Some were not, causing the patient to be bedridden for weeks, sometimes months. Some patients suffered delirium and hallucinations so bad they experienced lifelong psychological and neurological problems. Some had to learn to walk again. News items from one small rural community during 2 weeks in October suggest the enormity of the sickness and the death the flu brought to the county.
Lampasas Daily Leader, Friday, October 25, 1918. Nearly every family in our little community has from 1 to 4 cases of the Spanish flu. The 4-month-old child of Mr. and Mrs. Carl Bradley died Saturday and was buried Sunday here at Center Cemetery. Mrs.
Dan
Bradley,
Campbell,
at the same time, son of Mr. and Mrs. John Campbell, who formerly lived here, died Monday night at his father's home in Payne Gap. With our editor and his good wife in the death of their soldier boy, Will. Mrs. Thompson received a message that her brother-in-law, Edgar Hill of Waco, had died and would be buried. Ollie Smith is able to sit up after quite a spell of her daughter, Mrs. R.Z. Sanders, who is no better, in fact, very low. Her husband, Mr. R.Z. Sanders, died 2 weeks ago. Grandma Nance is quite sick in the home of John Nance, but is improving. Will Rose has the sympathy of the whole community in the death of her brother, Johnny McCann of Lomita, who died in Medders, and most of his family are in bed with the flu. The infant son of Mr. and Mrs. A. Brown died last week and was buried in the Center Cemetery. Is also sick. The Nance boys received a message this week that their brother-in-law, Sam Alexander, and at this writing there is little hope for Sam. Then Dee took sick, and his wife returned Tuesday from Mart, where he attended the burial of his sister, Mrs. R.Z. Sanders, at that place Monday. All this sickness, sorrow, and death around us, truly we have never seen so much.
So many people were dying that parents imagined the worst when they did not hear from their sons and daughters away on war service. Mrs. W.B. Abney of Lampasas sent a frantic telegram to her daughter Ruth, serving in the Naval Reserves in Washington, D.C. We have Ruth's letter and response.
Washington, D.C., October 25th, 1918. Dear Mama, I suppose you got my telegram and so are satisfied that I am all right. I can't understand why you haven't gotten any of my letters, as I write nearly every day, and every other day at least. The telegram frightened me. Don't ever do that again. If you don't hear from me often enough, blame it on the mails, as I am writing. If I were sick, I would certainly let you know, so rest easy on that score.
Ruth's mother had good reason to worry. Her nephew, Will Abney, had died of the Spanish flu at Camp Upton in New York only 2 weeks before. By late October, after raging through the county for almost a month, the pestilence began to retreat. First in Lampasas and then in the smaller communities of the county, the numbers of new flu cases dropped sharply. And as the flu departed, the rains returned.
Lampasas Daily Leader, Saturday, October 26, 1918. Church services next Sunday. We will have our regular services next Sunday. The epidemic has subsided, and good rains have fallen over the entire country. We invite you to come to the Lord's house with thanksgiving for his mercy and goodness unto the children of men. M.C. Bishop, Pastor, First Baptist Church. Lampasas Daily Leader, Saturday, October 29th. Schools reopen Wednesday. the public schools of Lampasas will reopen tomorrow morning. The buildings have been thoroughly fumigated, and there is less of a danger of catching influenza than there is in the home. Dr. D.W. Black, City Health Officer.
For reasons still not understood, the Spanish influenza began retreating all across the country in late October. Ruth Abney reported from the nation's capital.
Washington, D.C., October 25th, 1918. The epidemic is about over now. Only 22 deaths today, and Miss Walter says that there are that many here almost every day before the epidemic. I think everything will open up again in about a week.
With the wild celebrations following the armistice on November 11th, the flu had become an unpleasant memory for most people. Brought by the war, it had gone with the war. But it hadn't really gone. In November 1918, people continued to get sick and die, just in smaller numbers. Numbers that people who had had their fill of death could more easily ignore. The lull in new cases and deaths continued into December, but it was another of the flu's tricks. In mid-December, the flu came back to Lampasas County. More people died in December and January than had died in October. The flu continued to stalk Lampasas County throughout the rest of that winter and into the spring of 1919. It finally burned out completely the following year. The last person in Lampasas County recorded as dying from the Spanish influenza was Mary Moses, age 35, who died on February 28, 1920. There is little or no collective memory of the Spanish flu pandemic in Lampasas County or in the country as a whole, even though it killed more Americans than all the wars of the 20th century combined. For those who lived through it, it was a very real part of the Great War, fought on the streets of their towns and the sick rooms of their homes. People who survived it wanted to forget the flu's terror, its smell, its sound, and they did, mostly. And as a result, so did their children and grandchildren. And we are left with no recollection or awareness of their suffering and sacrifice.